This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guest is the Titan of Trees, Tony Kirkham. Tony has contributed to a stunning new book called Tree, Exploring the Arboreal World, which is a breathtaking collection of representations of trees, documenting their historical significance throughout human history, society and culture. This really is the coffee table book to end all coffee table books, for anyone with even so much as a passing interest in trees. Can you identify an experience that sparked your obvious love of trees?
Yeah, I can actually, and it's one that I refer back to quite a lot. It goes back quite a long time to when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and it was the conker of the horse chestnut tree. So it's really this time of the year, quite a long time ago. And when you see them on the ground, all shiny, the conkers, just coming out of their husks, it's quite an experience and they look fantastic and you want to pick them up and you want to save them. And also it was a source of ammunition for the game of conkers that I played when I was at school, because I grew up in a rural area, lots of trees, and that was a game that we played. And I challenge anyone today, if they're walking through a park or a garden under a horse chestnut tree and they see those conkers or shiny brown conkers on the ground, I challenge them that they can't be tempted to bend down, pick one up and keep it in their pocket. So it was that moment that really caught my attention. And I suppose I then learned more about the horse chestnut tree, why it was called the horse chestnut tree. I had a very good teacher at primary school who knew that I was interested in nature and natural history. And she encouraged me. And if it wasn't for that, then I probably wouldn't have gone into the occupation of growing and looking after trees. So I think that was one of the first moments. I did later find out in life, about 40 years later, that what my teacher taught me wasn't true. When I learned about the horse chestnut, why it was called the horse chestnut, from someone else, possibly might not be true as well. But I just thought it doesn't matter because it did the job and it attracted my attention.
Well, lots of people will be thankful that it did, I'm sure. So I've been connected with you over the book, which is published by Faden, called Tree, Exploring the Arboreal World. And you've written the introduction to the book, and a fantastic, beautiful book it is too. Obviously, there is a big canon of literature about trees, but this one I felt was quite unusual and different. And what do you feel that it adds to the canon of tree literature?
Well, I was part of the editorial team selecting photographs of art linked to trees, and we had a huge number of images to look at and to get it down to about 300. But every one was incredible. And having worked with trees all my life, even I hadn't realized how much trees have been used in art, from cave paintings right through to Lego trees to Harry Potter, the Whomping Willow. And I think that was quite an eye-opener for me. And I don't think that there's any other book, and there are lots of books on trees, but there isn't another book on the market that does that job of highlighting the importance of trees in art. And it just takes you through so many different aspects of art, so many different artist types, sculptures, paintings, models, you name it. And I think that anyone, even without a professional interest, without an interest in trees, will be inspired by this book. And I think it will make them go out and look at trees when they walk past them in the park or in the street or in their own garden.
That's so true. And I think it almost allows you to zoom out and look at the history of humans and trees, actually, and it puts it all into this kind of historic perspective. It's a very, very good book for that.
Yeah.
Did you learn much from the book that was new to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just writing the introduction, and I was terrified at first because I said to Faden, look, I don't know a lot about art. I'm not in the art world. And they went, well, we don't want that from the introduction. We want the introduction to introduce people to trees before they delve into the book, which is, more my scene. But I still had to research something about art and the history of trees and remind myself of how trees have evolved over time to today. And then reminding myself, which I'm doing every day, actually, and reminding people about the important things that trees give to us in terms of improving our ecosystem services every day, the materials that we use from them, how they improve our mental well-being, and then also the threats that trees face today in the world and how we need to change that. So, yeah, I did learn a lot from writing the introduction, and I'm so grateful to Faden for asking me to do it. As I say, I was terrified at first, but it was a fantastic thing to do.
Interesting also that you were involved in the choosing and selection of the images. It's such a clever idea to put those images in juxtaposition to each other. Were you involved in that as well?
Initially, there were I'm not sure how many people, probably about 10 people that were involved in selecting the trees, So we all did it individually, and then our scores, etc., were brought together, and then trees selected. And then we got it down to about 350, and then they had to go from 350 down to 300. I would not like to have been involved in that last selection piece. But then the team at Faden paired them up through the book, in relevance to each other. And then there are some that cover the entire 2 pages, the landscape rather than portraits on each page. And just the way that that's been done has been great. So initially with the selection process, but also not just ticking it and saying this needs to be in the book, but having to write a comment and say why you thought it needed to be in the book, because there could well have been other images that fell into that category. And what we were trying to do was to cover every aspect of trees in art, as I say, from paintings, photography, from ceramics, materials, you name it. That's what we had to do, and get that broad spread without repetition through the book.
It is clearly incredibly well considered. It's a lovely book that you really could dip into again and again. Were there any artistic representations or an artist whose depiction of trees particularly moves you or moved you once you discovered them through the book?
Well, I suppose because I'm a professional tree person, I love botanical art. And at Kew, where I worked for 43 years, we had an incredible gallery there with a turnover of artwork, botanical artwork. And this is where botanical artists paint very accurately the botanical features of plants. So some of the trees in this book, there are some of the key botanical artists through the book, like a Japanese artist, Masumi. And you'll be pleased to know that there's definitely one of horse chestnut conkers and flowers in the book, which are, again, is a botanical painting. So I tend to go for those. But actually, once I started looking at different types of art, I did like some of the abstract art. I can't name any of the artists offhand, but I did start to like some of the more abstract art and photography, some fantastic photography in it as well. People like Ansel Adams in America, who captured scenes, landscapes in North America in black and white photographs in the 30s. And they're just stunning, absolutely stunning, and make you want to go and see them. So, I did look at a photograph of trees in Yosemite, and I've been to Yosemite, and I saw this again. And I just thought, I've got to go back. And so our family holiday next year will be in Yosemite to probably try and match that photograph that Ansel Adams took. So, yeah, I was inspired by many of the images.
So you're talking of travel. In your introduction, you describe the Hoh rainforest in Washington. The word you use is magical. And I was going to ask you, what was perhaps your most profound experience that you've had in a treescape in real life?
Gosh, well, I've been all over the world, and in my work at Kew, after the Great Storm in 1987, I then spent about 25 years traveling around the world collecting seeds from trees to replenish what we lost in the Arboretum at Kew. So I've been all over the world doing that. But I think if there was somewhere that I could go to tomorrow, probably Chile. I think Chile, it's an incredible landscape for a couple of thousand miles longitudinally from the north down to the south, going through different regions, different zones. So from desert right down through to temperate rainforest. And you've got the monkey puzzles that grow there, which is, an iconic tree that everybody knows and everybody notices it. So Chile is an incredible place that I've had lasting memories from. And then China, I spent 10 years traveling around China, not for the entire 10 years, but during that 10 years, probably about 10 trips to China, collecting and doing some research. And it's just an incredible place, very, very rich in tree species. If any tree lover that wants to see trees, and China's, we call it the mother of gardens because most of what we grow in our gardens comes from China. But then I could go on and list Taiwan, Japan. Japan is another place which is just an incredible landscape of trees, temples, and I think the combination of trees and temples and people, that's the other thing, rather than trees on their own, brings out the different aspects of a country.
You have spent a lot of your working life in an arboretum, and you obviously have a passion for collections of trees that are well ordered and that are showing trees off to their best. But also you've done a lot of travel in the wild. But if you could only visit either wild landscapes or arboreta for the rest of your life, what would you choose?
God, that is a difficult question. It'd have to be wild landscapes, without doubt. I always say to students and trainees, apprentices, anyone that wants to learn about trees, visit a wild landscape and observe what you see. And you'll learn more from that than visiting a garden or reading a book, because you learn, how trees grow, how they look after themselves, how the plant associations, the different climates, the soils. You learn so much by seeing trees growing in the wild. And I just get a buzz today. Last week, I was in Scotland looking at the trees on the Atlantic temperate rainforest. So you don't have to go far to see trees growing in the natural habitat. And I still get a buzz from that. That's what I want to do. Most of my holidays are based around a bucket list of trees that I want to see growing in their natural habitat.
And you also said about going to countries where people and temples and trees all sort of coexist. And another thing that struck me when I read your introduction and then as I went through the book was that I don't know if we give trees and treescapes the reverence that they deserve. And in fact, I'm not sure I could identify a period of history when we've less respected trees. Am I just looking at things with a little bit of a negative lens, or do you think that we have got to the point where we're not revering them as much as we have?
I think you're absolutely right. We take trees for granted because we see them every day, we see them around. We actually take them for granted, and we definitely don't give them the respect that they deserve. I mean, some countries do, and there are some places in gardens and landscapes in UK that do get that attention to detail. But I think, we're going to have to up our game with the climate crisis, and we've got to start preserving trees and not allowing them to be felled or vandalized, etc. We've got to do more to prevent the loss of our treescape. And we've also got to do more when we come to tree planting. I'd love to get rid of the term tree planting and replace it with tree establishment. So every tree that we plant establishes, and we don't have orphan trees everywhere that are struggling to grow. So we've got to put more detail into that, more attention, and be more successful.
You'll be at the forefront of this and probably one of the best positioned people to speak on it. But thinking perhaps more positively, are there any really interesting developments in the scientific work around trees at the moment that you're particularly fired up by, or you think possibly deserves more attention, or anything that's really going on that you think's positive?
Yeah, we must never labour on the negative, and there are so many positives present in the tree world. Lots of research going on to fight pests and diseases. So we're ahead of the game now, looking on the horizon as to what is likely to come in and affect trees, so that we can either prevent those pests and diseases from coming in, or when they do come, we can eradicate them quickly before they establish and take hold. Advances in growing trees now in nurseries, using different types of pots to encourage fibrous root systems so that they establish quickly once they're planted. Big moves in using charcoal, biochar for establishing trees. And I think one of the big things now is that we are actually looking at doing a lot more work and research into what trees should we be planting for the future climate. The climate in the UK, the predicted climate in the UK by 2050 is that of Barcelona. So believe it or not, and most people won't believe me this year with the summer that we've had, but we're going to have hotter, drier summers. And I know this year we haven't had that, but that's what we're going to get. And we're going to get warmer, wetter winters. And that was actually classic last year's winter. So we need to know what we should be planting that's going to be successful in 2050. And that's one of the things when you're growing and planting trees, is looking ahead, looking forward. And it's often very difficult. But that's what we need to do. And that's what many organizations now are doing, and selecting trees that will cope with the climate that we're going to face.
Thinking about the long view, I mean, this book definitely does that. It makes you think about the context of trees in terms of human history. As you say, 43 years at Kew. I wondered how, now you sort of look back over your career, has your attitude to trees changed in the decades that you've worked with them?
I don't think so. I think I've always been very fond of trees, and I've always worked hard with organizations by, networking, bringing organizations together and sharing what we learn. As we grow trees, we think of new techniques, new ideas. I mean, it's important that we share those and we don't keep them to ourselves. And I think that we've been doing that for a long time now. I mean, if I look back over my career working with trees, I don't think I would have done anything different. And actually, all I would say is that observation is key. I know I've mentioned it earlier, but observation is key. Look around you, look at trees, look at them in the natural habitat, and you can learn so much from what they need and how they need to grow, and then share that information.
Thank you very much to Tony for sharing his experiences in putting together this beautiful book, and thank you for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out episode 245, The Language of Trees, and episode 291, Inspiration from Nature. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.